Now, let's go to the second one. And I started to explore my work with stone. Now, as you see, there's a characteristic hole there. Now, that hole says a lot about me because I am constantly trying to kind of work with the hole and create an environment around it. And part of that hole is that schizoid part of me. Now, this is one of my first stone pieces, and if I were to do this again, I would actually reshape that hole, because the hole is not yet completely connected to the stone that is holding it. But what I started to develop is an understanding of working with stone the way you would never work with any other kind of material, because you are in for a challenge with stone that you don't usually find in clay, for me at least. Because one of the first things you learn is that the stone is a wonderful teacher. The stone says, if you go against my rhythm, and if you fight me, you will not find anything inside of me. But if you hold me, touch me, feel me, and find my rhythm, and play with my rhythm, then we will find something together. And so, one of the first things that you learn as a sculptor is that you don't fight the stone. You let the stone speak to you. You don't try to impose your ideas on it. You may have something, but the stone will say something back to you. And the stone will have its own message that must unfold. And each stone then says something the way a patient does. If you try to impose too much your ideas on a patient, rather than discovering what happens between you and a patient, then you're superimposing, you're going against the person's rhythm. But if you hear the rhythm and play back with it, then there's something that can be discovered for both of you. And each piece of stone had its own kind of message, and you learn some things about stone. For instance, some of my students who work with stone, they are very frightened of injuring the stone, of giving it too hard a knock. And you learn that sometimes in order to open something up, you must use your aggression. Aggression is not hostile. Aggression is something healthy. Aggression is using that kind of force in yourself that dares to shape. So that the whole aspect of using your aggression and not finding it dangerous becomes a very important part of the parallel between a sculptor, an artist, and a therapist. Every once in a while you hit a crack in the stone and the whole thing opens up in a very different way. And you say, oh my God, where is it going now? And if you can follow the new accident, the new becoming, then sets the groundwork for new possibilities that are going on in the stone. And so one thing that you learn as a therapist as well, expect the surprise. Go with the surprise. And when the accident occurs, and when I say accident, suppose something you say slips out of you, and you say something awful to the patient, and the patient says, how could you? How could you say that to me? And, or you forget a session, and the therapist and the patient comes in. I was there, where were you? And you say, oh my God, here, this patient, I rejected this patient. But at this moment, in this kind of accident, sets the stage for something new to happen. Because if you can have the honesty of looking what happened, of what was going on inside of you, to create that accident, and to share that with that patient, it sets the stage for two human beings meeting. Because somewhere at that accident, you were acting out something very unconscious for that patient that was meeting your unconscious. And for you to dare to say, I met you somewhere and this is what happened to me. It is no longer therapist authority, patient for you. There are two human beings struggling there, looking at what happened, and there's some mutual sharing. And in that painful sharing, that if you can own up to, without judgment, without criticism, but this is what happened, this becomes the beginning of what I call a new transformation in treatment. Now, let's go on. I started to work with metal, and as you can see, a part of me likes to do something big. A couple of people in the audience are here, sitting here. This was done in Italy, and were with me in Italy. And it's a piece that, what I call my piece of transition. In my summer institute in New Hampshire, I always weld. And this took place in a new institute where some of my students started a new institute in the summer.
Well, svetsa. And that's translate, I didn't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was in Italy. It was an old farm. And as I was wandering around there, I saw these old welding tools. And I received permission to use them. And I put together some pieces I found on the farm. And I didn't know where this image had come from me, but it was both prehistoric, it had the curves, it had a certain direction, and it had a certain kind of, for me, very unconscious statement that I couldn't put words in, but it was somewhere making a connection from the past to the present to somewhere where we didn't know where we're going in this new program. And I started to recognize the first time that many images that come from you just don't come from personal experiences. That images can be pulled from many sources around you, from the future that you hardly know, not just from the past. And my Jungian friends might call that images sometimes come from archetypal sources. I started to learn that images are personal. They can be broad, they can be limited, but that the artist sometimes, or the therapist, can touch upon images in themselves that can call upon not just the personal, but sometimes something broad and bigger, so that somewhere you are pulling from the forces around you and bring that into your consciousness as a statement of not only your past, but of something bigger than you, something that is beyond words, that says something at another level of consciousness. Want to go on? Now, one of the things that, this is a small piece that I made in Manhattan, and my patients will be able to tell you they have seen that piece in me very well. This is the part of me that is the comic, the prodder, the person who provokes. And if there is a round holding part that needs to hold that empty hole inside of me, there is this prodder inside of me, this provoker that is constantly engaging my patients and my students, and it's playful inside of me. Now it's interesting that many of these images do not come out very easily in my social relationships. Many of my friends comment, "We don't understand you, Art. You are an extraordinarily quiet person. You stay by yourself." And then we see all your art that's very different. And when you are a teacher, or when you are a therapist, you are very different. But when you are socially with us, you are very quiet. And some of the people have asked me, how come you work so intensively? In many ways, my work becomes my holding. And I've created my way of feeding me that way, because I am able to do in the work frame that sometimes I do not do in the social frame. And that is, I allow my unconscious to come out and play with what is around me. But when I am in certain areas, that is all stopped. Now, I have learned something then about artistry and about art creations. What comes out in one place does not always come out in another. And that for someone to just do art and to think that that is a way of healing themselves, well, yes, that can sometimes occur. But often, the art in and of itself can create much that is going on that is completely cut off from the person's rest of their life. And that there is a difference from art expression and art that becomes healing or therapeutic, because when art is communicated to another person and there is created a meeting ground between the unconscious of the art and the artist and the therapist who receives it, and a space develops between them that is not inside or outside, but somewhere in between, that is what is commonly called that magical synthesis. It is where you go and hear a concert and you're transformed. It is where you see a play and you're right in the play. It is creating a space that lives. The artist creates that space with the artwork. But sometimes the artwork can only speak back in a very limited form, and for some artists, indeed, the artwork chases them. It becomes their oppressor. It does not heal them, but becomes a paranoid accuser until some artists even go crazy from their artwork. Now, it is not always possible then for some artists to be healed by their art, I believe, because there is a missing factor. You need the third party, the party that looks on and holds and contains the affects, the conflicts of the unconscious of the art piece and the artist inside of him. And the artist becoming a container with the therapist, and both of them developing a bigger container so that images, toxicity, affects, ideas are held inside of you, where you are holding for the person what goes on. That means that the therapist must be able to learn how to play with his patient. Now, I am not saying to you that play means having fun. Play means the imaginative meeting of two minds. And in this imaginative meeting of two minds, there is a sense of unity or oneness and separateness as two people with their mutual rhythms create a joint space, which I mentioned yesterday is what is commonly called the therapeutic workspace. Now, what happens in most treatment cannot have a therapeutic workspace. They bring to you the problem where the therapeutic workspace has been injured, has been restricted. And the problem of treatment is how to rediscover the aliveness of what Winnicott calls primary creativity, where there is some kind of object that becomes an extension of the mother-child relationship. And this object, a blanket, a special toy, which has all kinds of magic in it. It is the developing of that special space that holds the relationship. Well, if that relationship that goes on between mother or child and father and child has been impaired, the ability to create this transitional space, and this transitional space, I might add, is dynamic. It moves from one to separate. And some mothers, for instance, who are not resonant with their child, the mother comes in too much. the child feels suffocated. The child moves away. There is a lack of resonance. There are some mothers who pick up the child feels soothed, the child stops crying. Another, the same child, 1 second later, the child cries. There is something that goes on in this nonverbal context where there is a creation of oneness where the mother picks up the rhythm of the child, goes with it, gives the child space, and yet is one with the child until there is a development of the space in between. The development of the space in between is what I call therapy happening. And when that space occurs, two people are present. And if you want to define treatment in another way, it is two people trying to become present, the therapist and the patient. And the problems of two people finding, losing, regaining that presence with one another is the meat of what therapy is about. And that process goes on when you are working with your material, when you're an art therapist, when you're a psychoanalyst. That issue of being present, regaining presence, losing it, rediscovering it, that's what treatment is about. Be it an art therapist, be a drama therapist, be it a psychoanalyst. They may use different formats. They may use a different way of creating this format. But indeed, that ability to do that play of rhythm with whoever you are and finding and holding what I call the dysrhythmia of the patient. Because what they will create with you, your patient, is indeed the very kinds of problems of rhythm that they had with their primary object and recreated with you.